What is going on, coin traders? Thanks for joining me for the show. Looking at Decentralized Social, or DESO, DESO on that ticker. Been a pretty bad few months, pulling back pretty significantly from the most recent trend high back in January, pulling all the way back. We're looking over 66%. So definitely not necessarily the best run here on the shorter term, and even from the most recent trend high, still 62%. So pretty substantial and significant pullback here. Obviously not the best looking longer term setup, and plenty of longer term sells. But one of the things that we do have coming up for DESO, and actually a couple of things, is that over on Twitter or X, I did make a post earlier today talking about this update that Nader made. And if you're not familiar with him, he is the founder of DESO, Decentralized Social, essentially creating this blockchain that's stateless for social media. And so the big news announcement that we have all been anticipating is that Revolution Proof of Stake on DESO is launching the week of July 4th. Now, currently they are still on a proof of work consensus mechanism, and right now switching to Revolution, which is being tested on testnet. So it will go live and hit mainnet here on July 4th. And so the next big announcement too, and also taking place in July, is that Focus, which is the new, much anticipated social media platform and app that has been being worked on for the last several years here, is being launched on the end of July and July 30th. So July is definitely going to be a very big month for DESO. And I do anticipate seeing a lot more traction and a lot more growth at that point. And at a very bare minimum, I think we're definitely going to see a lot of selling pressure slow down as well, although I think we've already started to see it. And so essentially right now, I do think we are going to be looking at a very big month that should be a pretty big, great opportunity for a lot of exposure. And specifically, just kind of wanted to point out that a lot of exposure would be great because we're not necessarily seeing DESO listed on a lot of exchanges just yet. In fact, there's only 8 right now that we do see, and most of them are a Tether pair. In fact, we do have one Bitcoin pairing, and pretty much we only do have one US dollar pair, and that is coming off of Coinbase right now. Obviously, with these volumes, you can see not necessarily that much right now, so exposure would be good, especially when we do get a very nice use case like upcoming Focus. And I do think that real-world applications and utilities will definitely be one of the things that helps drive crypto, since right now it is just hype and speculation, as we've seen with the big meme coin boom. But to really see a big user base come into crypto, specifically with something like social media, I think is going to be a huge driving force, especially when we see that it's actually not that complicated and you can make a lot of gains, a lot of owned content and things like that with Web3. But anyway, nonetheless, I digress. You can see that right now HTX does have the most amount of volume, and there's a lot of speculation that this is extreme manipulation. So 9.5 million for daily trading volume compared to Coinbase's almost 300,000. So lots of room to grow, especially when we talk about overall daily trading volume. And that's especially apparent too when we look at this chart, especially when we drop down into something like some of the shorter time frames. You can see just not a lot of volume and not a lot of movement here coming in. And we're going to talk about that here in a second. But anyway, nonetheless, post a lot about DESO on my Twitter or X. So if you're not following me, at coin_trades is the handle. Looking forward to chatting with everyone over there. And so with that, looking back at this daily chart, like we said, huge pullback already from the start. One of the frustrating things about DESO that we've actually experienced is that any potential pump we do see can't actually maintain price action to the upside. So any potential pump loses it immediately. And that's why we have a lot of these candles with a lot of these big upside wicks, immediate pullback, big upside wick, pullback, pullback. So even most recently on this potential, we had a lot of upside movement and then immediately flushed and gave it back. So like we said, a lot of these big upside wicks on these candles. So that's been very frustrating for the bulls here, especially since constant downside pressure does give it back almost immediately. So we are going to be waiting for a little bit more of that selling pressure to fade. But ultimately, when we do, we know that those pumps are actually going to be very good and beneficial for a very nice upside move here for DESO. But right now, one of the good things that we have seen, especially compared to a lot of the other cryptos right now, is most notably just over the last couple of days, haven't really had that much of a sell-off compared to a lot of other cryptos that have been seeing multiple days of double-digit losses. So for example, even starting on the 17th here, only looking and even considering the current candle about 4%, the candle that just closed yesterday about 3%. So not necessarily that significant compared to a lot of cryptos that I've seen, like I said, double-digit losses over the last couple of days. So hopefully we can assume that this does mean that a lot of the selling pressure is starting to back off here. In fact, if we do zoom out, you can see most realistically where the next downside targets are going to be. Now, we do have current price levels pretty much approaching the heart line for support around this big consolidation move that we had from the start of October in 2022, pretty much through the end. So that whole month, the heart line of that's definitely been very nice for support, because otherwise, if we do lose that, we're pretty much going to be looking down to about the $15 level, just shy of that, as we do see a big point of previous resistance here once we actually flushed below it back in October of 2022. So that does impact a lot of potential here. So we would love to see price actually stabilize and find support below that, or above that, excuse me. But if we do see a little bit more of a pullback down to that level, that probably going to be is one of the technical levels on the downside we do look at. So from current price points down to that level, not necessarily that much of a significant retracement considering what it's done so far, but about another 11-12% to actually hitting that level is probably about what we'd expect. And the only kind of drawback and downside from that point is obviously it does decrease. So for example, from the immediate pullback 67%, and then from the current trend high right now, just below the $50 level would be a 70% pullback. But if we actually look at from that level up to the trend high, plenty of growth potential, 237. So great opportunities to make some new entries, especially with July shaping up to be a pretty big month for DESO. Obviously, a lot of potential, but a lot of resistance points up overhead here. And if we actually go ahead and zoom out to the weekly chart, plenty of downside to be looking at in terms of bearish volume. And in fact, you can see that over the total of looking at 16 bars here of bearish downside, we only had 2 weeks so far of bullish upside, and even at that, week on week decreasing bullish volume. So obviously not necessarily the best sign, especially when we talk about just continuous, obviously frustrating downside sell pressure, especially for something shaping up so good and with a lot of great things here on the horizon to be released. But still anticipation, like we said, volume for daily trading volume is extremely low, which is one of the things that creates just a lot of volatility in this. So once we actually see a lot more volume come in, this will stabilize, be a little bit more normal and realistic, and probably in that instance start to trend back to the upside, because right now, not necessarily that much buying pressure, since a lot of the owners already are in DESO right now, because there's not a lot of airdrops. And one of the things I do love about DESO is just the tokenomics here for it. And I can probably cover a separate video here later in the future about tokenomics and also more about the fundamentals and details of DESO. So if that does sound good, definitely drop me a note down in the comment sections below. And yeah, but otherwise, overall, still looking at a pretty okay chart in terms of entries. Right now, if we look at the RSI Relative Strength Index, one of the things is that we have been trading so far significantly below this exponential moving average that one of the things that we have been noticing now is that the gap here between the RSI and the moving average for the RSI is getting a lot closer together compared to what we saw actually earlier on this overall trend. So still a good sign in terms of the gap between these, because we know at some point we are going to be looking at a nice bullish cross, and then in that instance we will be looking at the next leg of upside. So the thing about this too is that if we look at stochastic RSI, we've actually been looking here at the stochastic RSI being pretty much smashed right along the zero line here for weeks on weeks on weeks. And in fact, I believe it was about 6 weeks that we actually saw both stochastic RSI lines being right at that zero mark. So a little bit of a bullish opportunity, failing it right now. And then that's why after rejection off these exponential moving averages, seeing more of that downside pressure, especially after seeing these as support. So still a little bit more of that downside support or pressure coming in rather, but do have plenty of those supports. If we do zoom out, you can look at that overall support level, pretty much down to about 14 psychological from the price of about 1542. So plenty of support to the downside, like we mentioned. And I do anticipate that being kind of one of the levels that we actually eye, potentially even before a bounce coming in next month. Looking at VPVR, volume profile, visible range, you can see how that was pretty much the next blip compared to where we were at. So looking over here on the right, VPVR, that was a pretty decent point of mass here after considering where we are now. But if we actually blow through that, pretty much not going to come down to any sort of support points until we get down to about 11, down to about the $10 psychological. So hopefully in a perfect world, 14 up to 15 will be a very nice zone that does hold if we do get down to that level before starting to see the next leg of upside here, because that would actually be an extreme significant retracement. And even pulling up the Fibonacci lines here, we're actually looking at a pullback and retracement right now on this weekly. that is breaking below the 78.6. So hopefully if we can find some upside support, we actually would be wicking down into this level, but still maintaining a weekly close on that. Still have about 5 days left for this weekly candle to close here, so plenty of time for the bulls to actually reverse that. Right now, still shaping up into an inside bar format and formation, though. And like we said, looking left, this is a big point of this support point, or the support level. And then if we do zoom out a little bit farther, you can see over here on stochastic, or excuse me, the VPVR, how we are shaping up to hit a little bit more of this point of mass here as well for previous trading volume history. So based on that, there is still potential for a little bit more downside support on the current area, and that's kind of one of the reasons why on the most recent altcoin pullback right now that we have seen over the last few days, we haven't really seen that much out of DESO, because right now we are still on a very big, nice support point previously, and all the way down to 14, like we said, so plenty of support. But if we actually go ahead and look at these exponential moving averages, specifically, we're going to be looking at the 50-period EMA, so we're going to turn off the 12 and 26 here. And let's go ahead and look at this exponential moving average. So huge point of resistance before the huge pump. Found it as a little bit of a point of support before obviously breaking it and then flipping it into resistance here. And then obviously on this rally now, several weeks of back test confirming this as a strong resistance. So we know that we're going to have this level as a big resistance. And first, we are going to be looking at upside resistance coming in about 1881. But like we've seen previously many times, we do have the price of DESO actually blowing through a lot of those resistance zones. Just a matter of actually being able to hold those. So most recently, as you can see, we had several candles that actually had a lot of volume attempt. And then just like we talked about, any potential upside rally, especially with volume, pretty much gets immediately sold off, which is one of the frustrating things, that we can't see a move that actually sustains and has any continuation and follow through. It's just one immediate short-term pump that immediately gives it right back. And it's not necessarily a small amount too. Typically, we talk about the double digits for a growth and obviously a pullback in that instance. So the point here is that when we talk about resistances, we have the potential to actually break those levels. It's just being able to maintain them, which is why the close is so important, just because we need to see a die-off of selling pressure and also a continuation of the longer term for buying pressure, especially with a little bit more of that follow-through here. Now, do you want to turn on technicals for the daily, specifically look at RSI? Like we mentioned, when the RSI gets close to the exponential moving average, we can be assured that here before too long, we're actually going to see a pretty nice bullish cross here. In addition to that, we're actually looking at a stochastic RSI that has been below the 20 line here, and hasn't necessarily been the best indicator for a lot of things, because looking left, you can see that we have had a similar setup here before, and obviously with that still had a pullback. But with that, actually looking at oversold conditions on this RSI, now actually forming a higher low so far on this RSI. Yet if we do look at the price and especially the closes, looking at a lower low. So do have a little bit of bullish divergence here coming in, where we do have higher lows on RSI, lower lows in price. So that does signal a little bit more of that decreased selling pressure, especially on the recent attempt here that we were looking at, where we actually did see the price almost come pretty close to actually having a pretty nice close on top of this 50-period EMA here on this daily chart. And so one of the things, like we had talked about, that we don't normally see is a support and continuation. So actually having 3 days kind of here of upside moves for DESO, significant anyway, was a little bit of a shock, but obviously broke it pretty quick. And in fact, if we were looking at a retracement from the top of that, had a pretty big sell-off, about 25%, about a 24-hour period here. But do want to flip over to the 2-day chart here, because this is a lot better of a picture for what we're experiencing right now, especially seeing all these resistance points and rejection zones, specifically in between the 12 and 26 period exponential moving average here. So don't even have candles closing above the 26. So still a very relevant point of resistance here below this 50-period EMA for this 2-day chart. And so that is going to be the first test and thing that we actually look for, is seeing these candles form a close and then break and actually close on top of this 2-day 26-period exponential moving average. As we can see from the volume down below, we're starting to get a little bit of a decrease in overall sell pressure. So we just started the new current 2-day candle, so plenty of time left on the current, but obviously now a little bit more of that would be kind of a downside scenario. So ideally, we would love to see some bullish action actually come in now, but like we mentioned, big resistance going to be coming in at about 1884 here, which was a big point of previous support, as well as looking left, big point of previous support here before heading up. So the fact that now we're actually looking at prices below that level that we haven't seen since the beginning of December is a little bit more of a struggle and pain point. But like we talked about, a lot of the selling is starting to get exhausted, and we do have a lot of great things coming up here. And especially one of the great things too that actually isn't really highlighted in the coin market cap rankings is that we're actually looking at a much bigger circulating supply than this. We're over 10 million already. Max supply is 10.8 million. So actually, I don't know why this is wrong. If you do know, let me know in the comments sections below. But yeah, we are a supply over 10 million here. So a lot of the tokenomics are extremely good for DESO, and we don't have a lot of those unlocks coming up here to actually help push prices down even further. So we don't necessarily have a lot of additional upcoming sell pressure. So it is kind of just market normalization right now. And especially with a lot of coins locked up in focus, the market hasn't necessarily been that strong in terms of volume, which is kind of why we have seen low volumes on the Coinbase exchange and why overall the price doesn't necessarily fluctuate and change that much, and why any potential move is kind of reversed and obviously fluctuates pretty easily here. Looking at some technicals for the 2-day really quick before we wrap up, and we're pretty much riding the lowest that we have seen for the RSI here, and despite being well below this moving average for the exponential moving average for this RSI, actually starting to fluctuate and actually start to flirt with the exponential moving average and growth on top of it. So at some point, especially after seeing our lows so far, if we can maintain a higher low, yet meanwhile, like we talked about, bearish divergence here, or bullish divergence here on this overall chart, higher lows on RSI would actually be a good sign. And then realistically would start to see this trend back to the upside in terms of this RSI, especially after such a huge retracement, and especially after stochastic RSIs heading down below the 20 line here. So yeah, overall 3 months of pullback, especially when we talk about over 50% retracements here on this move, has not been fun and haven't even seen any sort of upside hope. Just a longer term extreme sell-off. So we do need to see a return in buying pressure, but it does appear that a lot of the selling is being exhausted, especially when we talk about a lot of the rest of the crypto space. Like we said, seeing double-digit days over the last couple of days here, and obviously minimal sell-off and impact for DESO. In that instance, you can be pretty sure that we are starting to see a lack of increase and follow-through from the bears here. So that does give a little bit more speculation that right now this level that we are holding is going to be a little bit more of that support. So we would love to see 17 see a hold, stabilization, and a little bit more upside movement from there, especially if we can break the 1880 resistance point and actually start to get above these exponential moving averages and ideally flip them back into a bullish setup. That would actually be a great thing for the trend, because right now, as you can see, price being below the exponential moving averages has confirmed that downtrend over the last few months. So that's why we would love to get back on top of this big zone for exponential moving averages to help confirm that the trend is going to be heading back to the upside. So like we said, huge potential, especially with the upcoming launch of Revolution Proof of Stake and also Focus. So like we said, even going back to about the heart line for where we were at previously, pretty much right around the $40 line, looking at 136% or about 2.4x returns on current entries on the current level right now. Not financial advice, obviously, but knowing plenty about the project. And like I said, I will do a little bit more of a deeper dive on Focus and DESO. Let me know your thoughts down in the comment sections below too. But otherwise, that is going to go ahead and wrap up the show for today on Decentralized Social, DESO, DESO on that ticker. Hope you all enjoyed. If you did, please hit the thumbs up, like, and subscribe button if you have not done so just yet. Do appreciate it. Appreciate all the other continuous love and support. As always, does mean so much. Stay safe, take care, coin traders, and I'll catch you back in the next video.